Hello, welcome to this lesson. As you can read, this is about juveniles struggling with risk, an opportunity to address needs and protective factors. And this is me, it's Anna Costanza Baldry, and I'm going to shortly introduce you to several aspects about juvenile delinquency, as you can see listed here. So, what is a risk factor? What are risk factors when we talk about juveniles? Risk factors are characteristics linked to the individual, to the juvenile, to the circumstances when the crime took place, to the environment where he or she lives, to the family. Different factors, different characteristics that play a role in the perpetration of violence. We cannot talk about causes of violence when we talk about violence in general and juvenile also, so we can only talk about risk, so characteristics that in some ways can facilitate the overcoming of violence and eventually also its perpetration. So what is needed if we look at juveniles delinquency? We want to look at what can help us promote a model of intervention which addresses which are the needs of these juveniles, the risk and the protective factors associated with what they're doing, what's wrong. And this is very important in terms of intervention. The risk approach is also very useful for assessing the risk of recidivism, therefore assessing which circumstance can lead a juvenile to more likely recommit risk. That's why having a protocol, a risk assessment procedure that is shared between different professionals who work with the juveniles can be very useful in terms of addressing which are the needs, the risk factors, and the protective factors. So what are the dynamic risk factors? Dynamic risk factors are those so-called criminogenic factors. Those factors will change in time. Therefore, they can be there and then they can be away because of the treatment, because of different circumstances. Just let me give you an example. Risk factors, dynamic risk factors, for instance, can be drug consumption, alcohol consumption, place where a juvenile goes to school or hangs around friends. These are things that can change. And why they're criminogenic? Because in changing in time, they're helpful for us to address what can be initiated, but also what can bring a crime to be stopped by the juvenile. The needs intervention, therefore, looking at which dynamic risk factors are related to that juvenile's criminal behavior, that helps us develop an intervention programs which is based on needs, what juveniles needs in order to prevent their recurrence of violence. Is it because they're drug addicted? Is it because they're living in a poor environment? Is it because they're watching violence from the morning to the night? Therefore, they're more in a condition where violence can take place. These are the needs. What do they need? Are there psychological problems with these juveniles? What is needed to address in order for them to change their behavior? Protective factors are those factors that are present, and if they're present, they can reduce the negative impact of risk factors. Self-esteem is one of them. Real self-esteem. How worthy you are. How much you think you are a good person. And what I mean when I say real self-esteem, I mean a self-esteem which is not just pretending to be smart. You know, like some bullies, some head of some gangs, they think they're cool. But actually, what we mean with self-esteem is a real presence of a good value of yourself. If it's fake self-esteem, if it's something that you're just pretending to be smart when you're not, or when you're just making it up, but deep in your heart you know that you're not smart, then this is not real self-esteem. Self-esteem as a risk factor is somebody who knows at the end of the day that they're worth it in a good way. Self-worth is in fact related to it. Self-worth, self-esteem together with all so low moral disengagement. The moral disengagement is a very tricky risk factor. So having low moral disengagement, which means being detached from what you do. Oh, what's the matter? Everybody does something wrong. Everybody steals. I'm just stealing something. Everybody's violent. I'm just conforming. They might not tell you, the juvenile, with these wordings, but this is what behind moral disengagement. We saw therefore risk factors one hand, we saw other risk factors which can be like moral disengagement, so low risk factors, it's a protective factor. Cognitive and emotional empathy, this is very important. What kids, juveniles who commit crime feel about what they do, what they feel about the other person when they commit the crime. Do they have empathy? Here is very interesting, this construct developed by Jolliffe and Farrington. It's a construct that recognizes there are two levels of empathy. One is cognitive, so I'm able to understand what you're going through, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. Another type of protective factor related to empathy is the emotional empathy. Research has shown that both with juveniles and with bullies, those kids who show more emotional empathy, so they really feel what the other person is feeling, they're more likely to reduce the risk of committing crime. Therefore, having good levels of empathy, especially emotional empathy, keeps you away from danger. Therefore, is a protective factor. Social norms, social peer and family support, these are all good things. Social norms means who is around you? What is the environment telling you in terms of is what you're doing good? Is where you are living? The kind of culture of the people you're hanging with. What are they thinking about crime? So social norms that are social norms preventing violence, denigrating violence. These are good protective factors, as well as social peer support. If you have peers with whom you hang around who actually don't think it's cool what you're doing, this is a protective factor. Of course, the other end is that if you have kids, mates, peers, who support the criminal behavior, who are deviant themselves, this will be then a risk factors. Family support. Where's the family in all this? Might not be both parents. Whatever you feel defining family, that's fine. But if there are warm family environment, this is actually family support construct that helps reducing the risk of recidivism, which increases actually the likelihood of committing again a crime.